Hey, world history. Welcome to U15-L9 Basics of World War II Part 1. We finally made it to World War II. Your job, you're going to launch this Edpuzzle and answer the questions. Questions I ask you in blue text are going to be ones I want you to answer directly on the Edpuzzle. Make sure you're following along with your study guide because any important concept will be in red text and you should probably write it down on your study guide. And of course, if you have questions, please let us know. Learning targets describe the social, political, and economic causes and main turning points of World War II. Describe the causes and consequences of the Nazi Holocaust, including the effects of the Nazis' regime, war against the Jews, and other groups. So, heads up, today we'll have some heavy topics, because of course, World War II was very brutal in many aspects. So, first question: what do you remember from World War II from US history? And you don't have to tell me everything, 1 to 3 points is just fine. All right, now we'll do a little bit of a quiz. Don't worry, I'm not grading you on if you get it right or wrong. So, I'm going to ask you who was on the Allied side of World War II and who was on the Axis power side. As a hint, I gave you some of the countries right down here. So, who was on the Allied side of World War II? And who was on the Axis powers? So here are our two sides. On the Axis powers, we have Japan, Italy, and Germany. On the Allies, we have France, America, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union/Russia. So the crisis deepens, World War II. The first thing we're going to talk about today is fascism. What is fascism? It's a type of government and it's controlled by a dictator. And that's where the government controls all aspects of politics, economics, and also social life. People are forbidden to criticize the government. There is also radical nationalism, and it glorifies the state above the individual citizens. So, I came across this quote on my first year of teaching, and I think is a really good quote to explain the difference between patriotism and nationalism. So, the difference between patriotism and nationalism is that the patriot is proud of his country for what it does, and the nationalist is proud of his country no matter what it does. The first attitude creates a feeling of responsibility, but the second, a feeling of blind arrogance that leads to war. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about Italy first. So let's talk about Benito Mussolini. So he was a soldier during World War I. After World War I, Italy was in a huge economic depression. Benito Mussolini started advocating for a dictator, so he would travel across the country and gain popularity among dissatisfied Italians. So his speeches and rallies had a very theatrical show of display. He had very dramatic body language. He had contradictory statements. He displayed his mood. He made empty promises and lies. He had vivid metaphors and symbolisms, and a lot of those metaphors and symbolisms refer back to ancient Rome. So you'll see a lot of ancient Rome stuff like eagles. All right, here is a video link of a clip showing Mussolini's body language. I won't put it in this video for today, but if you're curious, definitely go check it out and you'll see just how crazy his body language is. So he became Italy's leader in 1922. Under his leadership, everyone had to stop criticizing the Catholic Church. He also had unrestricted police authority. So, in other words, he could have the police do whatever he wanted. He also outlawed political parties. He had complete control over the media, and he became allies with Germany. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Spain. So, Spain kind of has a weird role during this time period. So, Spain actually did not join in on World War II. So, you're probably like, then why are you teaching it? That's a really great question. So, when I was in college and I took my Spanish classes, people would keep on referring to this Franco guy. And they're like, oh, Franco, the history. And I'm like, oh, yeah, of course I do. I didn't know anything. So I just wanted to tell you about him real quick. just in case you ever get into a weird situation like I did. So, Francisco Franco, he was a high ranking military officer in the Spanish army. He held one of the top military rankings in the new Spanish government after World War One. And he and the new government really saw him as too powerful. They saw him as a huge threat. So, what they did, instead of killing him, they just exiled him to the Canary Islands. So, right here are the Canary Islands. You can see they're just off the coast of Lake Morocco. But that did not hold back Franco because he actually just flew back from the Canary Islands to Madrid. And in 24 hours of him landing back in Spain, he and Spain's army marched towards Madrid, which is the capital. He and his army took the capital, and he became the new head of the nationalist government in October of 1936. So, Franco was an authoritarian dictator, not a fascist dictator. Now, there is a slight difference in between the two. So, an authoritarian dictator has no singular goal for a country compared to fascist dictators. And we'll talk a lot about fascist dictators today when we talk about Hitler. So he was allies with Hitler and Mussolini, but he never had Spain join World War II due to Hitler unable and unwilling to help him take over France's land in North Africa. He did actually stay in power until 1973. Wow. So, out of all the dictators of this time period, he by far was the one who had the most time ruling. All right, another thing that kind of comes up during this time period is communism. We really start talking about communism a little bit more. So you're probably like, wait a minute, what's the difference between communism and fascism? Really great question. They're actually quite different from each other. There's a few little things that overlap. And honestly, this Venn diagram is just scratching the surface of the difference between the two. So, communism really has economic equality, classless society. So, there's no upper, middle, lower class, and also opposes private enterprises. Many people don't have their own businesses, everything is government controlled. On the flip side, we have fascism, which has a lot of national glory. It has very rigid class roles set by the dictator, so it has those upper, middle, and lower classes, and also support in private enterprises, meaning that there can be private businesses. Now, there is some slight overlap. That would be they both, of course, want societal well being. Um, they're very anti democratic, meaning that the people do not vote for their leaders. And they also have state control of resources. So it could be like physical resources, like oil and like food, stuff like that. But also media. Media was always controlled very strictly under both communism and fascism. All right, next, let's talk about probably the most notorious country during World War II, which is Germany. So, the German path to war. Germany breaks the Treaty of Versailles in 1935. So, let me ask you a question. What did the treaty say again? And if you don't remember, go look back at your study guide from U15-L9. All right. So with the Treaty of Versailles, one of the biggest things that we talked about was the war guilt clause. So if you remember, we talked about how Germany had to pay reparations about 122 billion marks, which really crashed their economy. As you can see here, like kids are just stacking up money in a pyramid because it's absolutely worthless. Germany also had to reduce their military to just 100,000 men, and Germany had to demilitarize around the Rhine River. So the Rhine River was that border between Germany and France. So again, they break the Treaty of Versailles in 1935. Germany then builds their army to about 500,000 soldiers. Now, France, Great Britain, and Italy saw this happening. But the problem was is that they didn't do anything about it. The reason for that is because all of these countries were dealing with the Great Depression. So, back up. What was the Great Depression? So, most of you took US history last year. What do you remember about the Great Depression? So, the Great Depression, for the United States at least, was from 1929 until 1939. There was major economic downfall. There was a decline in consumer demand, there were financial panics, but it wasn't just the United States. This was happening worldwide. So, the reason for the Great Depression, a lot of it was misguided government policies that caused economic output to fall across the world. This led to high prices, but little employment. So, people could not afford to live. All right, I was a little off topic. Let's get back to the German path to war. So, Hitler breaks the Treaty of Versailles. He began to draft for his military, he remilitarized around the Rhineland, and he also built up weapons for his army. So in 1936, Germany sends troops to the Rhine River, which again is supposed to be a demilitarized zone. And France's government is so disorganized at this point in time that they simply can't send the soldiers to fight back. So again, here's a map of the Rhine River. So you can see here it borders with Germany as well as France. Luxembourg, Belgium, and Netherlands are also kind of wedged in between there. Another thing is that Britain really, really feels bad for Germany for the Treaty of Versailles. So remember, Great Britain was one of the ones who actually wrote the Treaty of Versailles back after World War I. Britain actually supports fascism at this time because it's not communism. Yeah, that's the only reason. Britain was so anti-communism that they supported fascism, which will be one of their big downfalls. So Great Britain decided on something called the Dawes Act to lessen the money burden that Germany had to pay back from World War I to try to kind of help Germany defeat its own inflation. All right, you're probably like, wait a minute. Question though, how did Hitler rise to power? That's a really good question. So let's back up a few years. So Hitler became the leader of the German Workers' Party back in 1919, and this would then be known as the Nazi Party. He became very popular during the Great Depression, so popular that he got second place in the 1932's presidential election. That's a really big thing right here, because that's going to come up in just a couple of slides from now. So you're probably like, what is Nazism? So Nazism is a branch of fascism. That's where there is a dictator who rules. Typically, that dictator is very charismatic and also a high sense of nationalism, meaning that the country can do no wrong. Nazism had this goal to eliminate what Hitler described as the enemies of the German people. So he called the non-Jewish, non-Slav Germans Aryans, or the master race, and he believed that those were the perfect human beings. Okay, now let me explain what's going on in this slide right here. It's a little confusing, so listen carefully. So I said before, back in 1932, Hitler won second place in the presidential election for Germany. The guy who won first place is this dude right here. His name is President Hindenburg. Hindenburg sees that Hitler is super popular. So he's like, hey, Hitler, you know what? I'm going to put you as chancellor, which is like second in command of the German government. But that didn't last very long. What happened is that the Capitol building, which is called the Reichstag, as you can see right here, had a huge fire. And after that fire, Hitler took emergency power of the German government. Then he did something called the Enabling Act of 1933. That's where it gave the German chancellor power to control the country without needing to consult parliament or the president, which is Hindenburg. It also gave the German government power to ignore the Constitution for 4 whole years. This is how Hitler established a totalitarian state. So Hindenburg dies in August of 1934. Hitler combined the president and chancellor positions to become known as the Führer. A Führer had unrestricted government power, so they could do anything. So the main reason why Germans believed in Hitler's leadership and the Nazis was because they had hope that he would end Germany's economic depression. So another big player in World War II is the SS, or the Schutzstaffel, which is Hitler's personal army. So it was a political army of the Nazi Party, In 1933, there were about 50,000 members that Hitler could control at the snap of his finger. They acted as a sort like kind of like a police force. And they were separate from the German army, but they were trained like an army. So the Schutzstaffel means protective echelon, or SS for short. They're the ones who were overseeing the concentration camps. They did fight in World War II, but they fought as an elite military group. And by 1939, Hitler had 250,000 men under his complete control. Here's another really complicated but good question about World War II. So, I know in US history and probably a bunch of other classes, you talked about how Hitler would send like Jewish people to concentration camps, and this was just a devastating historical event. But why did Hitler hate the Jewish people? Where did this hatred come from? That is a good question and also a very complicated question. So, in the next few slides, I try to answer that question in the best, most simple way I can. So, Jewish people have been blamed for false conspiracies since Christianity began. They're accused of killing Jesus. They didn't accept the Christian God's word. They were causing plagues and secretly wanting to dominate the world. Again, these are all false conspiracies. In the Middle Ages, Jewish people could not own land or have public office. So this forced Jewish people to make a living off of banking and money loaning. Anti-Semitism. That is the biased hatred towards Jewish people. In the 1800s, Europeans saw Jewish people not as a religion, but as a race. So they believed people born of Jewish descent could convert to Christianity, but they could never get rid of their quote unquote Jewish blood. Also, Hitler blamed Jews for losing World War I. He thought that the Jews were somehow profiting off of World War I, and he thought that Jews wanted to overthrow the government. Again, all these false conspiracies. So in 1933, there were about 522,000 Jews living in Germany. But by 1939, 304,000 German Jews left Germany. And in 1939 to 1941, there was a series of laws passed that Jews could not work in the German borders. There was also the Nuremberg Laws. So this went into effect in September of 1935 and excluded Jews from German citizenship. It also forbade marriages between Jews and Germans. It went so far as the German government actually created these diagrams to show how Jewish someone would be. So on November 7th, 1938, this Jewish teen here, his name is Herschel Grinspan, he was visiting his uncle in Paris. So he was from Germany. He was visiting his uncle in France. He got a postcard saying that his dad was deported to Poland for being Jewish. Now, his dad had lived in Germany for 27 years and was sent to Poland, meaning he was sent to a concentration camp. Angry and seeking revenge, Grinspan shot a German officer living in Paris, and the German SS leaders were absolutely angry, which led to something called the Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht means the night of broken glass. It occurred on November 9th, 1938, where Nazi SS officers smashed all the windows of Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues. They also murdered 100 Jews in cold blood and sent 30,000 Jews to concentration camps. So here's some images of Kristallnacht. So you can just see this guy right here. He's just devastated, all the broken glass everywhere. You can see here kind of more of a close-up picture of what the glass looked like. You can see everything inside was also looted. Here's an SS officer in the act of smashing up windows. And you can see all the bystanders. They're clearly not stopping him. I mean, even look at that guy. He's smiling. So is that guy. So here is a quote from someone who saw it firsthand. All the things for which my parents had worked for 18 long years were destroyed in less than 10 minutes. Piles of valuable glasses, expensive furniture, linens, in short, everything was destroyed. The Nazis left us yelling, "Don't try to leave this house. We'll soon be back again and take you to a concentration camp to be shot." In 1941, Jews were required to wear the Star of David to ID themselves. So you can see here, they would either have like an armband or they would have to stitch it onto their clothes. In 1941, Jews were also sent to ghettos, which is a poor part of the city where minorities are forced to live. So there were a bunch of ghettos, especially around kind of the like Poland, Germany area. The Warsaw Ghetto probably being the most famous out of all those ghettos. So here's some images of inside the ghetto. So you can see all these ladies here had to wear the star. Here you can see the entrance into the ghetto. So you can see that it's guarded. It has gates. Here's an image of the marketplace in one of the ghettos. So you can see there's a lot of people, but there's not too many things to be sold. Here is a picture of the inside of the ghetto. So you can see that literally the walls are crumbling and just breaking apart. You can see on the bed, it looks like it's super dirty. I mean, there might even be mold over there. Just awful living conditions. So today, we're going to learn about fascism, Benito Mussolini, Francisco Franco, Great Depression, Adolf Hitler, Nazism/Nazi, Orion, Kristallnacht, and Ghetto. Next up, you're going to watch U15-L9, Basics of World War II, Part 2. If you have any questions, comments, or simply want to learn more, let us know. We're happy to help. Thanks for watching. Bye.